Hello and welcome to HR Talk. This week we're talking about the agency worker regulations, and I'm joined by Bridget Wood, who's a partner at law firm Blake Lapthorn. Employers have known that the new rules on employing agency workers have been on the cards since the EU Directive on Temporary Agency Work came into being in 2008. Regulations in this country were laid before Parliament in January last year, but employers then had to wait until May this year for guidance on these. And it then looked as if there might be a temporary reprieve when news reports came out at the beginning of this month that Cameron aide Steve Hilton had hired a barrister to look into the regulations, but no changes have materialised, so employers are going to have to cope with the new rules when they come into force on the 1st of October. So Bridget, if employers or agencies haven't got systems in place to deal with the regulations, is it too late to address the issue?
No, it isn't. There is still time. Although from the 1st of October, employers will have to put in place what are called the Day 1 rights, that is access to their collective facilities, so the staff canteen or creche facilities, and also let agency workers know about permanent vacancies that they have. For the main equal treatment rights under the agency workers regulations, there's a 12-week qualifying period. So the earliest somebody can qualify for those equal treatment rights is actually Christmas Day. So there is still a bit of time for employers and agencies to put systems in place to cope with the agency workers regulations, yes.
I'm sure that's good news for most people. So what are the basic essentials, that the do's and don'ts that agencies and employers need to have in place in order to protect themselves?
I think that agencies and employers should be talking to each other and assessing the impact of the agency workers regulations on employers' businesses. So first of all, looking at the kind of temporary workers that the employer uses, and then finding out whether or not they fall within scope of the agency workers regulations. Then if they do, see if they actually engage them for 12 weeks or more, and then what the potential cost impact will be. If there is a cost impact and it's significant, agencies and employers can talk to each other about possible alternative models which might reduce the costs. But the key, if they haven't done it already, is to do an impact assessment now. And agencies would be well advised to put in place questionnaires that they can use with agency workers and employers so that they can extract useful information that they need. So, for example, questions like, have you worked in the role before with the same employer? Because that question will help establish whether somebody has already got weeks towards the 12-week qualifying period. They'll also need to ask quite detailed questions of employers about the packages that they give to comparable direct hires, so that the agency worker can be matched with that direct hire in terms of their remuneration and working conditions. Another good idea would be for agencies to put in place a complaints procedure so that agency workers know who to go to if they've got queries about their equal treatment rights, and that will potentially stave off claims to the employment tribunal if an agency can deal with a query there and then rather than wait for a tribunal claim to come through the door. And I think also people should be looking at new terms and conditions, new contractual terms, so that, for example, agencies can extract the information that they need from employers, possibly agreement on confidentiality, and also possibly indemnities, but with fair risk apportionment in terms of how indemnities are given.
Thank you. If agencies or end users do get it wrong, what are they likely to face in the way of claims or fines?
Well, agency workers can take a claim to the employment tribunal, and employers and agencies can be liable. So employers will be liable for breach of the Day 1 rights that I described. An agency worker can bring a claim where the equal treatment rights they acquire after that 12-week qualifying period haven't been given. However, that it will first of all be brought against the agency, but if the agency can show that it took reasonable steps to extract the information it needed from the employer, and the employer didn't do that and they were at fault, then the employer will be liable. So, good reason for employers to make sure that they hand over information about comparable direct hires to their agencies. And then, if somebody is successful the employment tribunal will award compensation that sort of matches the breach and any loss of earnings, and they have to give a minimum of 2 weeks' pay. And then if there has been anti-avoidance or breach of the anti-avoidance measures that are contained in the regulations, that's where, for example, group companies structure assignments in such a way that people don't achieve the 12-week qualifying period, then there's a fine of up to £5,000 for breach of those provisions. So, reasonably hefty.
Yes, quite a hefty fine. We asked our membership on the PM LinkedIn group whether they had any questions on the agency workers regulations, and they have come up with a few. One member of the group asked whether they should be looking at an overall comparison of pay within the permanent workforce.
No, unfortunately not. The regulations require you to match each element. So you have to look at basic pay, for example, whether anybody has more holiday entitlement than, say, under the working time regulations, more contractual paid holiday entitlement, bonuses, all the different aspects have to be reflected. So just because you look at the overall package and it seems to be equal or more, unfortunately that isn't how you comply with the agency workers regulations. It has to be looked at piece by piece.
Thank you for that. Another question, do agency workers get the same period of notice, in our case a month, as their comparator after 12 weeks? That's from another member of the group.
No, they don't. There are a number of things that are excluded in terms of matching, and notice periods is one of them. Obviously, if an agency worker is engaged as an employee, they do have a statutory minimum notice entitlement, but generally speaking, the agency workers regulations don't ask you to match notice periods with comparable direct hires. And similarly, other things are excluded, like redundancy payments, occupational pension schemes, those kind of things. There are exclusions from things you have to match. I think people will be relieved to hear.
Yes, indeed. Another question was, what do we do about equalising a performance bonus where the agency worker is earning more than an employed comparator? This was an IT contractor, I think.
Yes, again, unfortunately, you can't say the IT contractor's overall rate is higher and therefore we've matched. You would still have to compare the basic pay of the comparable direct hire and also what they get in terms of a personal performance bonus. So there's some argument for saying, perhaps look at the rates that contractors are paid and break it down into elements, so perhaps reduce the daily rate, but then boost it with the other aspects, for example, the bonus.
See? Thank you very much for that. And if you want to know more about this subject, go to People Management online at www.peoplemanagement.co.uk or join